I want to bring in Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Governor Pritzker, thank you so much for taking the time. And I really enjoyed our conversation back then. I was reflecting on it today as we were preparing for this interview. So when I spoke with you a few months ago, you said, which is so reasonable and it stuck with me, you hoped Republicans would start calling Trump out on his dangerous rhetoric. Instead, many are now amplifying his attacks on our justice system, especially in the last couple of days. I mean, this might not surprise you, but what is your message to all of them now in this moment?
Well, they should begin by renouncing the violence and the jailing that President Trump is calling for. You've heard a lot of his supporters, Laura Loomer and others, congressmen from Georgia, calling for either the death penalty or jailing of people who don't support Donald Trump. And it is divisive. What they are doing is now taking sides with Donald Trump. That is the part that I think is un-American. This idea that we're going to have a country where you can no longer speak out with your views as a Democrat or even as a Republican. And I know many are afraid, as I said months ago. But the idea that now you're going to be threatened with violence, that's a challenge that I think the American public is going to stand up to. And in fact, it's going to call to Americans who really want a country where you're allowed to stand up and vote as you want, to say as you wish in the political arena. Standing against that, being for violence, that's un-American.
Absolutely. I do want to play something to this point that Marjorie Taylor Greene said earlier today and get your reaction on the other side of that.
We're literally a banana republic. So what does it matter funding the government? The American people don't give a
I mean, she's essentially, the context of her comments is she's basically saying we should shut down the government over a guilty verdict. And this is an attack on the system, an attack on our rule of law. I know it's happening here in Washington. You're not in Washington, but I just felt the need to call it out.
Well, the American people have a choice to make. It's clear. There's a president in office who's trying to truly make progress. And, there's a convicted felon running against him who's trying to make bail. And these are choices that Americans are going to have in November. I think the campaign from now until November needs to be a reminder of who these two people are, and particularly that Donald Trump, a convicted felon, an adjudicated rapist, is a serious contender for the presidency. I think that's going to be rejected by a majority of voters.
So one of the points the campaign has made is that, Trump obviously is a convicted felon. He will be a convicted felon. He's been convicted of these crimes. It's not going to be central to their message. I'm a believer they need to connect whatever they do to how things are going to impact the American people. I think you are as well. Talk to me about how much of the message you think that should be. It is a historic moment in a dark way. And what percentage should be about other issues that people are thinking about out there in their homes?
Look, this is going to be decided in November at the ballot box. And I think what's going to drive people to make their decision is what the stands are by the two candidates. So let's talk about that. Because, although before Donald Trump's name come the words convicted felon and adjudicated rapist, the fact is that Joe Biden needs to remind people that he's the only candidate running who's going to preserve our freedoms. Let's talk about reproductive rights. Let's talk about workers' rights and voting rights and civil rights. That is what Joe Biden has been fighting for his entire career and as president of the United States. Who's on the other side? This is a guy who literally sent jobs overseas while he was president. He rejected science. And the result of that is that hundreds of thousands more people died than should have in the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a former president who is a racist. He's a misogynist, a homophobe, a xenophobe. This is a person that does not represent the values of American families and the American people. I think we've got to make that very clear from now until November.
One of the issues you and I have talked about is abortion rights, and you have been incredibly outspoken on abortion rights for the totality of the time everybody's been fighting against Dobbs being overturned. 20% of people in the recent New York Times poll blame Joe Biden for Dobbs being overturned, which bends the mind. But I'm just asking you, how does the president and how does the party convince the public, the people who think that that's not true and not the case?
It's messaging over and over and over again, just reminding people that it's clear what the choices are. I mean, Donald Trump keeps saying that not only is he opposed to abortion rights, he's also opposed to contraception. He's also opposed to IVF. I mean, this is somebody who I think most Americans would say is out of touch with modern American society. Women should have the right to make decisions for themselves about their own futures, and this is about their economic futures. This is about the future of their families. And we're not just talking about, a poor single woman who may want to get an abortion. That is something that happens, and we want to make that available. But also about families and spouses who are making decisions about the futures of their family. They may have children now. They may be trying to have more children with IVF. Donald Trump wants to cut all that off. And, we got a hint of this extension of the anti-abortion movement in the decision that was written by current Justice Clarence Thomas when he talked about going after contraception, going after LGBTQ rights, going after IVF. So we knew this was coming. Now we have a presidential candidate who used to be president who's proven that he believes in that philosophy. He appointed the 3 Supreme Court justices who put Dobbs in place. And we know what the future of women's rights are going to be as a result of a Donald Trump second presidency.
Before I let you go, Governor, I know a lot of Democrats out there watching are looking forward to the convention and all the speeches. There are a lot of concerns expressed about potential for protests, potential for violence from protests. I mean, hopefully not, of course. Can you tell me a little bit more about the preparations happening in Chicago and how concerned you are about that?
Well, let's remind ourselves that the last convention that was in Chicago was in 1996. It was a phenomenal convention. I think I've been to every single convention since I was able to vote. And that 96 convention in Chicago, the last one here, was the best, if you ask me. Now, the convention we're about to put on, even better, because first of all, we're going to show off the values and the diversity of the Democratic Party, also the tremendous amazing kinds of advancements that have been made because of Joe Biden and his policies. And let's point out that they were bipartisan bills that allowed us to build infrastructure, to invest in the CHIPS and Science Act, to bring climate change policies that are good for the American people. That's all going to be on display at our convention. In terms of safety in the city, we've got every level of law enforcement, from the Secret Service and the FBI all the way down to Illinois State Police, Chicago Police Department, even Milwaukee Police, and our sheriffs and sheriff deputies on duty to make sure that everybody has a safe and productive time and secure time while they're here in Chicago. And there will be protests. Let's be clear. We're going to stand up for the right to people to express their First Amendment rights. But we're also going to make sure that everybody has the ability to enjoy the city and to get to the convention safely. And I think the American people are going to get to see the best of the Democratic Party inside that convention hall.
Nowhere better almost than Chicago in the summer, I have to say. Governor J.B. Pritzker, thank you so much for taking the time this evening.